From Acres U.S.A., you are listening to the Acres U.S.A. podcast, a conversational podcast where we'll explore sustainable farming, regenerative practices, and the latest innovations in eco-agriculture with some of your favorite farmers and ranchers. I'm your host, Taylor Henry, the owner and CEO of Acres U.S.A. Welcome to the Acres U.S.A. podcast. All right, we're joined with Jeffrey Kleypas. Jeffrey is a agronomist for AEA and has kind of an interesting background. Came from a more conventional agronomy role and now working with AEA. He works with a lot more sustainable, regenerative type farms with the different biological products that they offer. So Jeffrey, thanks for joining us. And how's everything? I know you're dealing with some rain down there.
First off, thank you for inviting me to the podcast. It's a pleasure to be here and share everything I've experienced over the years. But yeah, we just got done going from a drought to a flood with 20 inches of rain in basically a 24-hour period here on the southern tip of Texas. And we're still drying out from that. And unfortunately, it's going to be a hit to our production system since we did have planting going on all the way back in the end of January with corn and had corn, sorghum, and cotton primarily up, so still waiting to see what the full destruction is going to be, but it doesn't look pretty in places.
What kind of soil do you guys have down there? So, I mean, is there farms that you saw? I can't imagine many farms can absorb 20 inches of rain. And how quickly did it come? Was it like a 48-hour period?
Yeah, I mean, this whole region got between 8 and 20 inches for the most part. We're talking basically a 3-county area here in the Rio Grande Valley, lower Rio Grande Valley, right next to Mexico and the Gulf. But yeah, I mean, a lot of our ground, it ranges, but I would say most of it's a sandy clay loam. We're known for growing vegetables and citrus in this part of the state. But we're also a delta region and drainage is not the best in certain places. So it kind of depends on where you're at. I mean, here locally where I live, I don't really see too much flood water left, but I know some of the other farms are still struggling getting water off, and families are still stuck in their homes here. I guess we're about 4 or 5 days after the event. So this is more of a hurricane type situation versus a spring storm. I think 1911 is the year they kind of take us back to on having anything like this happen.
Yeah. Well, I was going to ask that next. Do you guys deal with hurricanes?
Yeah, we usually get them right during cotton harvest, unfortunately. So tropical storms and hurricanes have been an issue here in recent years for our cotton farmers and getting their crops out. Because of course, once you get too much rain, then the cotton seed sprouts and ruins the lint, and you get mold and everything else. So unfortunately, I've seen more cotton get shredded down than harvested in the last few years.
Yeah, our region has dealt with floods in the past, and we had a 100-year flood, and then a 100-year flood 2 years after that, and then we had a 1,000-year flood. So I think we ended up within like a 10 or 15-year stretch having 3 or 4 100-year floods and 2,000-year floods.
Yeah, it seems like we're getting all the generational weather events right now in our lifetime.
Yeah, I mean, fortunately, we have knock on wood. It's been a few years since dealing with that, but I'll tell you what, I was a police officer for a few years and worked night shift during some of those floods, pulling people out of cars and wading into water. And I'll tell you what, when it's dark in the middle of the night and you're on county roads and you hear the rush of water, there is nothing that I think Mother Nature can throw at you that's more powerful than that. That is some scary stuff.
No, definitely. And we got this flood, the bulk of that rain fell after the sun went down. So, yeah, it was definitely a question of what we were going to wake up to the next morning. And Harlingen, one of my friends there, told me their weather station read 12 inches in just 1 hour. So it was some pretty fast rains.
Yeah, I don't know if we make. I'm sure someone might have a farm that could absorb that, but that's not normal in any means.
Nope.
Well, Jeff, I think uh, you know, I think your background, I'd love to hear a little bit more about that. You came up through the agronomist as a more conventional type agronomist. So you want to talk about a little bit about your background and how you ended up where you are right now?
Certainly. So I grew up, my dad's a retired Lutheran pastor, so we moved about every 4 years while I was a child, but spent the bulk of my youth up in the Texas Panhandle and um, both riding a tractor as a little kid and then eventually working for the neighbor on his cotton and cattle operation. And that's what really, that along with having family and farming really drove my interest at a young age as far as getting into agriculture. And I always had the dream of having, a several thousand acre cotton farm, but no family to really have the help of inheriting that from. And we all know that the challenges that any young farmer, whether they're already in the game or not, faces with the price of entry price of getting into to farming when you're talking about commodity crops with tractors and land prices and just availability of land for that matter. But I kind of looked at what the next best thing could be to actually being a farmer when I was getting ready for college, and that led me down the road to becoming an agronomist because I figured, well, if I n- not necessarily can farm, I can at least help farmers. So that's why the primary reason why I went into the agronomy field and got my bachelor's degree at Texas Tech University there in Lubbock, and uh, ended up moving down to the southern tip of Texas here in the Harlingen McAllen area, basically straight out of college. Thought it would be about a 5 year gig, but ended up staying down here, having to learn citrus and sugar cane, vegetables. I mean, you name it. We're basically known for growing pretty much anything warm season that you can do here in this part of the state. So it's a very diverse area. When I came down here, I was hired as a field sales representative, so was doing standard crop consulting, um, chemical sales, fertilizer sales, all that kind of stuff that you would expect from a national retailer. Um, was actually put in as the guinea pig to run a new part of the business that we were doing at the retail level with a seed treater. So I got to go get my pesticide applicator's license to do seed treatment and learned all the ins and outs of that fun part of the industry, which, that's kind of carried into what I'm doing now as well to some degree, which I'll get into in a second. But from there, it kind of took a few different paths and working with some different companies to expand my career. So ended up working in the irrigation industry as a district sales rep across the 12 state area here in the central U.S. for one of the drip irrigation companies. Worked in the post-harvest industry during the COVID years, so I got to find out all about coatings and everything else that goes into food preservation and whatnot. And then, like a lot of people that come to AEA, got introduced to John's podcast and started listening to the things that he was doing and talking to a couple of customers that were mutual customers with what I was doing as well. And the rest is history. But I knew I wanted to do something different because I was tired of dealing with toxic chemicals and the smell and just feeling bad when I would get home and all that kind of good stuff, which a lot of our customers relate to when they come to us. And it, making the switch to AEA has been rewarding for a variety of reasons. But I think number one is just seeing the impact on overall health of our ecosystems, whether it's ourselves, the environment, the soil, whatever the situation is, because I see more and more farmers that have gotten cancer, someone in their family's gotten cancer, or some other disease that, a lot of that can usually be tied back to some of our traditional methods.
Yeah. Do you want to give an example of someone that did get some sort of cancer and what was the process for them to trace that back. I'm sure it isn't an easy thing to wrap your mind around, that possibly the thing that you've been doing and were told to do for 20, 30 years might be the reason why you're sitting where you are right now in a health crisis.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not even going to really go into the cancer piece on this example, but my wife grew up right on along the river with her parents, with a farm basically right across the street that was a vegetable farm. So, I mean, vegetables down here, the soccer moms love that nice clean leaf. They don't want to have any holes in it or anything like that from either a disease or insect pressure. So as a result, the vegetables are definitely sprayed a lot historically, just so that um, we have that nice clean leaf. And as a result, we're looking at having some different in the family and in the area, just different um, diseases, autoimmune diseases, those types of things that people have gotten and has influenced their life.
No problem. Well, I can relate to them for wanting a pretty looking crop, um, but it's I was actually talking to a friend of mine this past weekend, and he works for a scent company that essentially I think they develop the scents that go on, say, like dryer sheets, and I think scents are a hot topic too, where they can cause some issues. And I'd asked him, this is a person that has no interest in agriculture, has never really thought about this before, and I'm like, did anyone in your like manufacturing facility ever have like skin issues or any sort of like negative reactions to working with all these chemicals that create these scents? And he thought about it for a little bit, and he's like, yeah, now that you mention it, there was like two people that had to be removed from like the floor because they had some sort of like skin reaction and health problems from it. So it's when you're told by authority figures that this is a good idea, it's difficult to wrap your mind around. Instead of just feeling sick or maybe feeling slow that day or having a little bit of an issue, that you would actually tie it back to the thing that you were told is safe. So yeah,
Yeah,
you have an interesting background there.
and I mean, I know, common products, and I use them myself. So, I guess you could say I'm kind of being contradictive a little bit here, but something as simple as glyphosate. I mean, it's simple, easy to use, has its purpose for killing weeds and just making life easier, I guess you could say, because I know I spray fences and things like that with it. Uh, I'm not going to say fairly frequently, but I use it as a tool for that. But I think, looking at those types of products beyond um, the potential impact on disease for the human population, if we just look at it from an agronomics perspective, we know that we've got the chelation component and the potential to interfere with the microbiology. And I always tell growers, let's understand what the disruption is from whatever we're applying, and then let's go back and make that correction so that we're having the least amount of impact on the environment in the field, and all that. Of course, those impacts go and relate to yield and quality and whatnot as well. But let's correct whatever we're disrupting and have as little bit of a negative impact as possible.
Yeah. What have you experienced as far as the things that you look at now when you're going to prospective client versus things that you were looking at before, as far as like the recommendations when you look at a soil test, you look at someone's farm, and your idea when you were in more of the conventional type of landscape, and how different it is in the position that you are right now?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the easiest way to explain the difference in my perspective is, instead of looking for what needs to be killed, I'm looking at what needs to be improved so that we don't have those pests come into the field, whether it be an insect or a disease. Weeds are a little bit different story, but even there, it's amazed me to see firsthand how a grower can have a major issue with pigweed or water hemp. We get rid of the nitrates in the system, and those two weeds disappear for the most part. They're not the major problem that they used to be. So there's even, when you look at just changing nutrient profile in the soil, getting rid of certain weed species or making them a less of an issue, and then also the ability for, and we've got numerous farmers within our consulting services that have completely eliminated, or at least 80% eliminated, the need for an insecticide or pesticide or insecticide or fungicide application in their fields. And we've done that completely through mineral nutrition management and just understanding why those plants need certain nutrients, what may be an excess, what may be a deficiency, but just building a better, healthier plant that's resilient to all the environmental factors and promoting life instead of trying to kill something.
Hey there. Did you attend our EcoAg conference this year in Madison, Wisconsin? Well, if you didn't, or if you did, we've got the recordings now available. Get on-demand access to every session with the EcoAg recordings. Learn directly from the pioneers of soil health, livestock integration, and profitable regenerative systems, all at your own pace. Speakers include Gabe Brown, Alan Williams, John Kempf, Joel Salatin, and a lot more. We also have additional products that include the full-day workshops done by Matt Powers, John Kempf, Nigel Palmer, Jordan Green, Mark Shepard, and Austin Unruh. These workshops are in depth and will help you dig deep on the presenters' topics. Grab your recordings now at conference.eco-ag.com/24 recordings or find the link in the notes. Because the best investment you can make is in your own knowledge. Now back to the show.
Yeah. So let's take an example. You come on a farm and they're raising commodity type crops. They've been as conventional gets, but they're interested in making the transition. What are the stages essentially to wean them off of the chemicals? Are you in a position where you're like, we can knock off insecticides, fungicides in this timeline, then we go to glyphosate or herbicides? What does that look like? I'm sure it has a lot to do with the comfortability of the producer, but in your guys' position with the products you have, like, what are the things that we can knock off, in stages?
Yeah, every farmer is going to be a little different, and even with on the same farm, different fields are going to be different. So, it's not a one size fits all approach necessarily. And that first year is usually the biggest challenge because we're learning as much as the grower is learning from us, because we've got to see how the whole system is working around their farm. Um, depending on where the biology is in the soil, how much that's been supported, how much rainfall. I mean, uh, I like to tell people I can perform miracles, but I can't make it rain because it's I've seen huge results in the first year. I mean, even in dryland situations, I had one cotton grower that did a side by side trial, and when we did the harvest analysis, we increased the yield in that field to basically a little bit over 100% yield increase, which is insane. I mean, we went from zero point 0.8 bales of cotton to 2.1 bales of cotton just by changing the way that we were. Well, one thing we did was we cut back on nitrogen, which sounds crazy, but that was one of the things that was part of that program. And then also just giving that plant better biological support, or I should say the system, not the plant, uh, better biological support as well as nutritional support, so that that plant was healthy and also providing the biology what it needed. But where I like to start uh, any system is looking at getting some biology inoculated into that system. And then a big part of what we do at AEA is using SAP analysis to really let us understand what is lacking in the plant, how nutrients are moving, what is in excess, and making very detailed um, changes as far as what we're doing in the management that current year. But just basically, what I'm trying to do that first year is figure out what kind of the baseline of where they're at, how we can make the nutrients that they have in the system more available, and then fine tune everything. It's kind of like us taking a vitamin pill, and just getting that extra nutrition that we need to be sustainable. But it's basically um, the steps as far as application and everything are pretty much in line with what a grower is doing now, from as far as a seed treatment, uh, in-furrow application, foliar application, fertigation. Those things are still things that we're utilizing as far as application methods, but it's just looking at the products a little bit differently, and the way that we're using that SAP test in order to fine tune the system.
Would you say, if you could pick out like one consistent thing, I know it's difficult to say there's anything consistent across of multiple farms, but is something that you kind of go into it when you're talking to a conventional producer that you think that you're probably going to be able to reduce those nitrogen inputs in the first year with the implementation of some of these biological products?
Yeah, nitrogen is the one that I hesitate the most as far as reduction, because it seems like it's the easiest one to bite you in the foot if you get too aggressive with doing the reduction, because it's something that has to be earned. I think that's one of the key things to remember when farmers are looking at changing to more biological system, is that you've got to earn the right to be able to reduce those rates. A big part of it, though, is also using the proper form of fertilizer. Don't use a form that's going to hurt you. So, I mean, yeah, potassium chloride may be the cheapest option for you to apply bulk potassium if you need it, but there's better forms of potassium that are going to be friendlier to the system. And even if they're higher, you can actually run reduced rates and get the same results. Because, I mean, potassium chloride, if you're getting 10% of your potassium, you're usually doing pretty good in a lot of places. So, that's one. I would say potassium and phosphorus are where we have more success in year one of getting biology to supply those than we do with nitrogen. But once I would say roughly 3 to 4 years is kind of the magic number of where you can see 80 to 100% reduction in a lot of those bulk applications, if the system is working properly. There's a lot of ifs in there, and that's where the consulting piece comes in, so we can help the grower understand what's happening.
Yeah. Do you want to talk about the mindset of what you see, when you jump on a farm and someone's looking or interested in transitioning? What is the mindset that they have? Did they experience some sort of pain point that has just pushed them this direction? Did they just, because of education, they've gone this direction? What is the thing that you're seeing the most that has made folks, want to make the change?
Yeah, I would say the growers that come to us is a different conversation than the growers that I approach on my own. Um, so the growers that come to us, they've definitely experienced some kind of pain point, whether it be cancer in the family, or just that fear of cancer or other diseases uh, as a result of the practices they've been using on the farm. Some will be driven by just wanting to be better stewards of the land. Some will be driven um, by, I mean, profitability would be one, increased yields. They're looking for those things. And I think, speaking of increased yields and profitability, I think one of the biggest fears or misconceptions with regenerative agriculture in general is that if you switch to regenerative, you're going to have a yield drag. If you're experiencing a yield drag with regenerative ag, then something's not happening right in that program. And I mean, we've seen plenty of yield increases, or people staying with their current yields but getting better profitability out of it. So, I wanted to touch on that while I was thinking about it, but um, that's definitely shouldn't be a fear, and is actually something that people will come to us for. Now, the crowd that I go to, as far as cold calling, that's a much more conventional mindset a lot of times. So I'm having to go back and have more of a conventional conversation around the approach, and it's probably more baby steps as far as what we're trying to accomplish there, going after identifying one specific goal and just focusing on that. Um, and sometimes even with people that come to us, I would rather focus on achieving that one goal than changing the entire farm in the first year, because sometimes, depending on the logistic ability of that farmer, their equipment and everything else, if you try to start doing cover crops, no-till, more foliar feeds, more intensive management with sap, whatever the case is, and you add all those pieces up in the first year and you haven't done a lot of those things, sometimes that's what sets us up for a failure, and we have to pull the grower back and slow them down a little bit.
Yeah. So I think it makes sense that folks are posting this. Is just kind of interesting. On X and LinkedIn lately, I've been, seeing a lot of growers post, their essentially projected P&Ls for crops this year. And, nearly every single one, I think they're almost posting it as kind of like it's not a joke, but they're, kind of laughing about it. Because each crop is at a loss in the projections right now. So what are, I think a lot of people look at maybe working with you and they expect some sort of, an investment that has to take place in those first few years. What is the messaging to the folks right now? I mean, we're looking at, if in normal commodity, conventional commodity right now, you're essentially putting seed in the ground that you're expecting to lose money on. What is the recommendation for this year with the economics involved with everything?
Yeah, that's something we've actually been talking a little bit about this week, and I even made it a little bit of a joke the other day that building a budget for a farmer this year is almost like uh, trying to put the limbo stick at the lowest setting and trying to crawl under it. And that's nothing against any grower trying to do that, but it's just the fact of reality with what monies are available for a budget this year. But the approach I've been taking is, let's look at and see what the total program may look like for the year if we have the rainfall and everything's in place. But let's take it a step at a time. And I'm prioritizing more building the biology than I am even the nutritional inputs, because the biology is going to be there next year. Versus if we just go out there and put a lot of nutritional inputs into the system, it could be there, it could not be there. So let's do something that can build not just for this year, but for the years to come. And if we need to shut things down after the first full year or whatnot, just because the commodities or drought or whatever the case is, we've got that option, but we're not losing our input that we already put into the system. So that's one approach I'm taking. I mean, definitely, if someone wants to push the what they're doing a little bit, because we've had some growers that are not really making too many changes, we'll definitely add a little more nutrition in there, and with a little bit more yield expectation and whatnot. But with me currently working essentially Kansas and south into Texas, we're in a pretty dry situation overall. So a lot of growers that I'm working with are being very conservative with the overall approach and kind of expecting the worst. But at the same time, we want to at least give that plant a chance to get going if we can get it out of the ground and get the process started.
What yeah, I mean, your example of the cotton grower who, doubled their yield. how do we bottle that up and scale that? Because I mean that would be obviously there's a lot of things going on with that, but I mean that's an incredible example.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a unique situation. So, I don't expect to see that kind of yield jump across the board. But that area in general had they're used to not making a really good crop here the last few years. I think that's one thing that's really played into a lot of their systems. So the fertility that they invest into their system is very low considered to a lot of other regions. Um, the other thing too is, biology had never really been paid attention to on that farm. And I think it was kind of a combination of just giving a little bit more biology, well, giving a little bit more fertility and giving a nice biological system into that field. Plus, that was a good field, deep soils and whatnot. And the same farmer did essentially the same program on some other fields that weren't as deep of soil, and we didn't see the same results. They didn't have the same rainfall on those other fields and whatnot. So, there's definitely the environmental factors that come into play. I don't want to sound like we can just go out across the board and double a person's yield in a dryland situation, because that's far from the truth. There's a lot more pieces that go into that. But I think the biggest thing is, let's look at our crop rotation, because they planted sesame on the field where we had that yield response. So did the sesame come into play with root exudates and things that it left behind, and the whole system just worked together? There's a lot of different variables in there. Because I think a perfect example is we had an agronomist in Wisconsin do a trial with our BioCo Gold product, um, and it gave essentially a five bushel yield increase across the board. And there was two things that stood out in that trial. One, there was one variety that had no change in yield. So when people talk about how the breeding of some of our newer genetics has bred out that interaction of the biology with the soil, I think there's a lot that is true about that, and that this trial backs it up. But there was another plot that he had in there where I think it was horseradish was planted the year before, and that gave a 17 bushel yield increase. So when we talk about cover crops and the importance for you know building soils, I I can't help but think that there's a huge importance of the crop that's following those cover crops and what benefits we have with that, just from the biology perspective and how that's going to help the next crop. So, um, I think when we look at what blend we're putting together on a cover crop, little things like that come into play. But the biggest thing, and the reason I'm not giving necessarily direct answers on some of these questions, is because we look at it as a system. So it's hard to, in a conversation like this, to necessarily point to one thing and really focus on that.
Yeah. What are you seeing any producers? I say this because I'm a cattle guy and I like this idea a lot. But with the economics where they stand right now, are you seeing anyone cut back on their normal production and say, let's go put out a 7 series or 5 different diversity blend of cover crops, and with cattle prices the way they are right now, let's go graze it this year instead of putting a crop in or putting in a commodity crop in.
The only thing I've seen really with cover crops in the commodity price is with the EQIP programs, the various NRCS programs that were there before the last election, when that money was available for people to put in a cover crop. There's still, I know people that did cover crops for the first year ever simply because they had the money given to them by the government to put that crop in. And in places, I know a lot of those didn't even germinate this uh, last spring or or not spring, but last fall when they put those in, just because they didn't have the water available to them. So there's definitely some challenges depending on where you're at geographically with the cover crop piece. I think more people are looking at cattle as part of maybe putting those into operation, but it hasn't really blossomed to where it necessarily was even, back in the 80s and 90s. I mean, I remember as a kid with cattle being on just about every farm, but now you don't see that nearly as much.
Hey, eco farmers. This is Taylor Henry with Acres U.S.A. I hope you enjoy this podcast as much as I enjoy interviewing these folks. If you're serious about regenerative agriculture, I've got an incredible resource you need to check out, the Acres U.S.A. membership. You farm in the physical world, and you deserve a physical printed magazine to match. Since 1971, Acres U.S.A. magazine has been the leading voice in ecological agriculture, delivering the best insights from regenerative farmers, agronomists, and researchers to help you farm profitably without toxic chemicals. Our membership included physical and digital copies of the magazine each month of the year, which has always been a standard for Acres U.S.A., but we wanted to over-deliver on content. When I acquired this business, I was happy to find that we had years of audio files from presentations at our annual EcoA conference. And guess what? They were hiding. Well, not anymore. We developed this membership portal that gives you access to the recordings from farmers like Gabe Brown, Gary Zimmer, Joel Salatin, and Mark Shepard. We also include recordings of private events. Finally, if you are like me and you like listening to content, we are now producing a membership-only podcast of each issue of the magazine, so you can consume each article while you're out in the field. To make things even sweeter, you'll get discounts on books, workshops, and events to keep expanding your knowledge. So are you ready to take your farming to the next level? Join today for a ridiculously low price at eco-farming.com or see details in the notes.
Yeah. In my mind, I think I picture a lot of, crop production folks that, still have lotted up cattle as a secondary to, run grain through or something. And, in those operations, why not just kick them out into, a third or a quarter of your production fields instead of, running this gambit that seems to be like a losing endeavor this year. But
Yeah, I mean,
I know moisture is a huge one that we can't control, and that's the game.
well, I'd definitely love to see more cattle out in pastures, and uh, several customers have seen where they've run some cattle just i- better crops the next season. So there's definitely a relation there. And when you look at the pillars of regenerative ag, I mean, putting it cattle or putting livestock out there is definitely part of that. Which some people just can't do it logistically, and that's okay. But wherever possible, I'd love to see more cattle and livestock in general out there. There's a producer out in West Texas that runs a bunch of sheep, and he's basically moved from row crop production into running sheep and whatnot. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens in the next few years, especially after all of the dust storms we've experienced in the plains this year. I know y'all got to breathe some of our Texas air, even though you're several states away.
Yeah, I guess that was kind of strange. I never heard of that before. um, so what are some of the positives that you've seen? Folks that you've worked with for 4 or 5 years, and what are some of the major changes they're seeing on their operation, whether it's in their soil health, but also just their overall human health too. Are you seeing really positive feedback from folks?
Yeah, there's a lot of success stories out there. One of our growers, um, he's basically gone to zero insecticide, zero fungicide. I believe if I remember correctly, his fertility inputs are down basically 80% as far as NPK. Um, and he's a grower that came to us basically saying, "I've got to make a change, or I'm going out of business." So he's, definitely. I don't know if thriving is the correct word, but he's definitely doing a great job on the farm now and being profitable. And it's fun for me to see growers be profitable again, come to us and say, "Hey, farming is fun again." Little simple things like that uh, really let me know that what I'm doing is having an impact. Um, from a health side, I think the biggest thing that I like to look at there is actually working with cattle ranchers. And when they send me their beef carcass data that they send off for nutritional testing, and they'll send in meat from one of the major grocery stores that is just the standard grown beef that we all eat, and you see that the omega 6 to omega 3 ratio is the same as fish on the what is coming off of these regenerative farms versus a 6 to 1 ratio with our standard feedlot beef. And I think that right there tells a lot of the story when you have opponents to eating beef, and they say, oh, it causes inflammation and so on and so forth. Well, yeah, the regular feedlot beef probably does some of that with the higher omega 6 ratio. But then when you look at what we're doing on regenerative farms with a local animal and can provide a super healthy product that we consume, all of that translates into human health at a greater scale than just ourselves.
Yeah, it's where does someone send samples like that into? I should probably do that.
That is a great question. It's one we get fairly often. I know there's a lab in Utah that does it, and there's probably a few others. I haven't really personally dove into which labs they are, um, but it seems like it's more at the university level where some of that work is being done.
Yeah, that makes sense. To kind of wrap it up, I always like to ask folks who are on the ground at so many farms, what are some of the technologies and trends that you're seeing that you're most excited about right now?
Well, I know it seems more handheld devices are trying to make their way into the industry. We're working. I know John's talked about it some on the podcast as far as the Croptics piece that we're doing, and I'm really excited to see how that's going to come out and change the way we're able to do sap testing right there on the farm, get that live data analysis back on the nutrient levels in the leaf. And I think, just more of that, the more we can make some of these things that take a week to get data back on, that can definitely speed things up. Uh, I'm a little bit concerned with AI in agriculture right now. We've done some tests with the various AI pieces out there, just asking very specific agronomic questions, and they'll even send back um, some of the references that they find, and we've uh, fact checked some of that, and it's actually not even a real reference. And I'm really concerned that people are going to rely on some of these AI generated answers more than they should, and always go back to your trusted educated source, I guess, would be my advice on that piece. But the one thing that's for certain is agriculture is changing rapidly. I mean, I grew up on a little 2 row cotton stripper, and now look at the multi-million or the $1 million machine that John Deere's got for stripping cotton now. I mean, it's a completely different animal compared to what I grew up on, stomping trailers and all that kind of stuff. So, best thing I can say is be flexible and try to embrace change as you can, because we're definitely going to have it.
Yeah. Yeah, the AI monster is not slowing down. Um, all right, Jeff, is there anything else that you think is important for us to mention here, or how folks can get a hold of you and work with you directly?
Yeah, I think the one thing I do want to mention is that following social media, even within the regenerative agriculture circles, but agriculture in general, we need to come together as an industry. There's too much infighting and pointing fingers and laughing at each other. Let's let's help each other out and be successful together, because none of us are going to get to where we need to be as an industry if we continue to fight with each other. And it's just disappointing when I see people laugh at others just because they're doing something different and don't understand the local situation that they're dealing with. And that's one of the things that I kind of pride myself on, and I know we do as a company, in meeting the grower where they're at and helping them achieve the goals for their individual situation, not not faulting them for something that they may be misstepped on or misaligned with right now, but helping them get to where they need to be. And I would say that's the number one thing I would like to see change in agriculture right now. But no, as far as getting a hold of me, probably the easiest way is to call into the Advancing Eco Agriculture main phone line, and that, or sending an email to me, which we can definitely get that out to everybody.
Yeah, we'll throw that in the notes. I'll echo the same sentiment that you had there, and it is frustrating. I think it happens on both sides. You know, folks in the sustainable regenerative world like to point fingers without having, a lot of it comes from folks that, get excited because they learn these new things and they haven't necessarily had the agricultural background, so they didn't go through the pains, and they don't show grace well enough to the folks who've been doing this for a long time and have dealt with a lot of stuff over the years that have put them where they are. And yeah, I think showing grace to each side, and then hopefully the other side, the conventional side, doesn't feel so attacked and they're more willing to come over and try some of these new things. So
Yep,
I agree
definitely.
with that. It's frustrating to see the finger pointing and just
But
drama.
Well, I like to say we're a product of the way we were taught. So if you were taught the conventional way, I mean, that's the way you think. And, fortunately for myself, I've been able to experience other ways of doing agriculture successfully. And that's where I'm at in regenerative ag, and feel personally, I feel regenerative ag is where we all need to be, but I'm not going to force that on a grower that's not ready to go down that route either.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, Jeff. Well, it was great talking to you. We'll put your email in the show notes. We'll put the AA number in there, and wish you the best of luck this year. And Jeff's also writing some articles for us. He had an article in the February issue of the magazine, so keep an eye out for that.
It's been a pleasure. I appreciate everything.
All right, thanks a lot.
Thank you for listening to the Acres USA podcast, a podcast production of Acres USA. Find us on Spotify, Apple, Google Play, and other popular podcast platforms. Acres USA is North America's oldest publisher on production-scale organic and regenerative farming. For more than 50 years, our mission has been to help farmers, ranchers, and market gardeners grow food profitably, regeneratively, and with nature in mind. Find our books and other Acres USA media and learn about Acres USA events at acresusa.com. Read our online magazine at members.acresusa.com, and we'd like to thank Acres USA staff for their contributions to producing this podcast. This episode was edited and engineered by Weston Larson of Acres USA. We're grateful to our guests for taking the time to talk with us about their experiences.